Welcome back to China in the Hill, your essential weekly update on the U.S. China news and policy debates unfolding in Washington, D.C. and beyond. It's November 19th, 2025, and we're here to break down the latest in U.S. China relations, from a potential $330 million arms sale to Taiwan to the release of the U.S. China Economic and Security Review Commission's annual report. Let's get into it. Two new bills with national security implications were introduced this week. The Defense Biotechnology Strategy Act would require the Department of Defense to develop a comprehensive strategy addressing the national security risks and opportunities posed by emerging biotechnologies. Meanwhile, the Law Against Nefarious Drones Enforcement Deconfliction Act aims to strengthen coordination between state and federal authorities in detecting and stopping drones used for unlawful activities. Lawmakers are also holding a full slate of hearings across committees. On Wednesday, the House Select Committee on the CCP held the predatory pricing, how the CCP manipulates global mineral prices to maintain its dominance. On November 20th, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will hold a hearing titled Examining Implementation of the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act and Future Opportunities for U.S.-Taiwan Cooperation. The House Homeland Security Committee will also hold a hearing on examining foreign adversary threats to subsea cable infrastructure, and the House Foreign Affairs Committee will hold a hearing on export control loopholes, chip-making tools, and their subcomponents. Last month, President Trump gave South Korea the green light to deploy nuclear-powered attack submarines. However, key details remain unresolved, including where the submarines would be built and how enriched uranium fuel would be supplied. Washington has long prohibited Seoul from enriching uranium, yet South Korea is now pushing to develop its own fuel supply chain to bolster energy security. The move has strong domestic support, with some viewing enrichment as a way to gain nuclear latency, the ability to produce nuclear weapons quickly if regional threats escalate and U.S. commitments prove uncertain. Following his announcement, President Trump said construction would take place in U.S. shipyards, but those facilities, including Philly Shipyard, acquired last year by South Korea's Hanwha Ocean, do not currently have the infrastructure or engineering capacity to build nuclear-powered submarines. Analysts note that developing such capabilities, whether in the U.S. or South Korea, would require years of investment and significant new infrastructure. In chips news, Amazon and Microsoft have both announced support for the GAIN AI Act, a new bill that would require chip makers to first satisfy U.S. demand before exporting advanced processors to China and other countries under arms embargoes. If enacted, the policy would give major U.S. tech firms priority access to high-end chips for their global data centers. Another provision in the bill would ease export license requirements for trusted companies in certain regions, a change welcomed by Amazon and Microsoft, who have faced delays under current rules. NVIDIA, which controls roughly 80% of the AI processor market, opposes the proposal and argues that it's an unnecessary intervention that could trigger even tighter export controls. In other news, the Pentagon announced the sale of $330 million worth of fighter jet parts to Taiwan, the first arms sale to the island since President Trump returned to the White House. Taiwan's presidential office, noting the arms sale was the first announced by the current administration, thanked the U.S. government for continuing the policy of regularized arms sales to Taiwan and supporting efforts to strengthen the island's self-defense and resilience. Taiwan's defense ministry said the sale is expected to take effect within a month. The provision of the parts will help maintain the Air Force's fighter readiness and bolster air defenses, strengthen defensive resilience, and enhance the island's ability to respond to China's gray zone incursions, the ministry said. Beijing has launched a series of retaliatory measures against Japan after Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi suggested Tokyo could deploy its military if China attempted to seize Taiwan. Remarks Beijing said violated its One China principle. On Friday, China's embassy in Tokyo warned Chinese citizens against traveling to Japan, citing serious safety risks. The advisory prompted the cancellation of more than 491,000 airline tickets, roughly one-third of all bookings from Chinese carriers to Japan. China also deployed Coast Guard vessels near the disputed Senkaku Diaoyu Islands and signaled that economic and diplomatic exchanges with Tokyo could be paused. Japanese officials criticized the actions as excessive and said the ship deployments violated international law. Amid rising tensions, Japan has sent a senior diplomat to Beijing for urgent talks. China remains Japan's largest trading partner and a major source of tourism. Top Senate Democrats are criticizing the Trump administration for delaying a new export control rule aimed at restricting Chinese companies' access to U.S. technology. The rule would automatically block exports to any Chinese firm that is at least 50% owned by a sanctioned entity. closing a long-standing loophole that allows subsidiaries to continue purchasing U.S. chips and equipment. President Trump agreed to postpone the regulation for 1 year as a part of a deal with President Xi Jinping, in exchange for Beijing suspending its rare earth export restrictions for the same period. In a letter to the White House, Democratic senators warned that the delay risks advancing China's tech ambitions and undermines U.S. national security by reopening pathways for blacklisted firms to restructure and avoid restrictions. The administration defended the move, saying it remains committed to a rigorous export control regime to safeguard national security. Lastly, on Tuesday, the U.S. China Economic and Security Review Commission warned in its 2025 report to Congress that China's threat to U.S. national security has escalated over the past year, and cautioned that without stronger action, Beijing could gain leverage over critical American supply chains and weaken U.S. military readiness in a future conflict. The Commission's top proposal calls for creating a new interagency economic statecraft entity to coordinate sanctions, export controls, and other economic tools. It also urged Congress to bolster defenses against Chinese-made energy storage systems, warning they could be exploited to infiltrate or disrupt the U.S. electrical grid, citing lessons from the 2023 Volt Typhoon cyber attack. The report highlighted China's rapid growth in military space capabilities, and said Beijing's expanding satellite network could constrain U.S. forces during a conflict. It recommended increased funding for the U.S. Space Force to establish space superiority and expand wargaming focused on potential Chinese attacks. The Commission also pressed the Pentagon to be more transparent about its ability to respond to a Taiwan contingency, warning that China's recent actions in the Taiwan Strait suggest the U.S. and partners can no longer assume such a crisis is distant. The report also added that ongoing trade tensions, from China's rare earth export restrictions to U.S. semiconductor controls, underscore the need to strengthen America's enforcement infrastructure. China's embassy in Washington has not yet commented on the report. And that's all for this week's edition of China on the Hill. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe to our new Substack for the latest updates, full transcripts, and bonus content. Link in the description. For more from the National Committee, check out our other podcast episodes wherever you listen, or visit our YouTube channel for in-depth discussions, interviews, and analysis. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.